Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of clinical precision.
Oh, absolutely. It feels almost like engineering.
Right. Yeah. Like if you fall and break your arm, you go to the hospital, they put you in the machine, and the X-ray produces this undeniable jagged white line on a black background.
It's incredibly binary, which is something the human brain just naturally craves.
Mhm.
Broken or not broken, sick or healthy.
Exactly. We find so much comfort in things that are visible, things we can easily categorize into neat little boxes.
Sure, because it gives us a sense of control.
But then you step into fields like, say, neurodevelopment or deep trauma or complex psychology, and suddenly that pristine X-ray machine is just totally useless.
Yeah, you're staring at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
Right. We're left trying to measure the invisible. Now, I want you, the listener, to take that inherent human desire for clinical binary precision, that need for the jagged white line, and imagine applying it to the most abstract concepts in human history.
The fundamental nature of good and evil.
Exactly. And that is the mission of today's deep dive.
It's a huge undertaking. We are essentially looking at a system that attempts to map the invisible with the precision of a celestial mechanic.
Yeah, our goal today is to unpack a massive, highly detailed, and frankly mind-bending conversation featuring a Catholic exorcist, Father Ripperger.
And it is an incredibly intricate framework he lays out.
It really is. And I want to set the table clearly for you right up front. Whether you are deeply religious or, whether you are a hardline materialist skeptic who thinks this is all ancient mythology, or even if you are just insanely curious about how different belief systems construct their reality, this deep dive offers a fascinating framework.
It really does. It's a completely different way to view human psychology.
Right. We're going to explore a theological worldview where cosmic battles are not happening up in the clouds with lightning bolts. They are happening through precise mechanical rules inside the human mind.
We'll be mapping out how angelic intelligence actually functions, the mechanical methods of demonic influence, and what this worldview claims is the ultimate underlying purpose of human free will.
But to understand the sheer scale of this, we have to recognize that the source material isn't presenting some vague, ethereal, cloud-like interpretation of spirituality.
No, not at all. It's a rigid architecture of reality, very structured.
Yeah. But before we gaze up at the heavens and the structure of these angelic choirs, we need to ground this in our daily lives.
Which means looking at how this source radically reinterprets the daily news cycle, our political landscape, and the physical world that modern society just completely obsesses over.
Right, which brings us to this incredible premise the source lays out. It's the idea that the true battle for the country, and really the entire world, has absolutely nothing to do with politics.
The speaker in our source material makes the argument that politics is essentially a massive, culturally consuming smokescreen.
A total distraction. He suggests that regardless of which political party currently holds the levers of power, the leaders themselves are likely operating under heavy diabolical influence.
It completely reframes human conflict. Instead of viewing modern political and social movement through the lens of policy or economics, this framework views them as literal spiritual warfare.
Okay, and we really need to pause here for a second to be unequivocally clear. We are not endorsing this view, nor are we taking a side on the highly charged political and social issues mentioned here.
Right? Our job is just to impartially map out how this specific theological framework categorizes human behavior. We're just reporting what the source claims.
Exactly. So in this particular worldview, the source specifically points to actions like sending young men to fight and die in foreign wars, or the societal push for certain psychological and physical bodily changes, including things like transgenderism, and he categorizes them not as cultural shifts, but as modern iterations of ancient human sacrifice.
The underlying logic of the source is that these societal actions are orchestrated spiritual attacks.
Basically, the ultimate aim in this theology is the destruction of human innocence, the distortion of truth, and the compromise of physical integrity.
Yeah, it operates on the absolute premise that the physical body and the mind are the actual literal battlegrounds. The ballot box is just a symptom of a deeper spiritual rot.
And there was this incredibly surreal moment in the source material that perfectly encapsulated this for me.
Oh, the sponsor reads.
Yes. Woven right into the middle of this intense, heavy theological discussion about the demonic corruption of humanity, the interviewer did a couple of sponsor reads, and they serve as this almost poetic, completely ironic metaphor for everything the Exorcist was talking about.
It was striking. First, there's an ad for the Glacier app.
Right, which is pitched as this military-grade digital privacy tool. Burner numbers, encrypted data, keeping state actors and massive tech corporations from tracking your phone's every move.
And then immediately following that, there's an ad for the Superpower app.
Yeah, and this one tracks over 100 physical biomarkers to pinpoint your exact biological age, with the goal of optimizing your physical health and staving off physical decline.
The contrast there is staggering when you view it through the lens of the Exorcist's worldview. It highlights a profound irony about modern human priorities.
Like, as a society, we happily expend massive amounts of resources, time, and anxiety to build a fortress around our digital data. We want to protect it from unseen government algorithms.
And we meticulously draw blood to track our cellular metrics, desperately trying to protect our physical bodies from the unseen process of aging.
But yet, according to this theological framework, we walk around completely stripped of armor, entirely unguarded, and blissfully oblivious to the unseen tracking and active exploitation of our spiritual and psychological selves.
Exactly. Are we essentially installing a state-of-the-art laser grid security system on our front porch while leaving the entire roof of the house torn off?
That's the perfect analogy. It makes you wonder if our hyperfixation on data privacy and political squabbling is just a massive coordinated distraction from a much larger war.
That is the core argument being made.
Mm.
By hyper-focusing our survival instincts on material threats, viruses, hackers, political opponents, we become completely blind to the immaterial threats.
Threats that, according to this theology, are actually pulling the strings and directing those material outcomes in the first place.
Precisely.
So if our political anxiety and our digital footprints are just ground-level distractions, what about the things we literally do see in the sky? Because if there is a massive spiritual war happening, we have to talk about how this source interprets the modern UFO phenomenon. I mean, it's been absolutely everywhere in the news lately.
It has. And the source doesn't shy away from the accelerating timeline of UFO disclosure at all.
Right.
In fact, it addresses it head-on, noting how this topic has rapidly migrated from fringe internet forums straight into official mainstream channels.
Yeah, the material cites recent public statements by high-level political figures like Vice President Vance, the declassification and release of official government aerospace files, and even narratives being pushed by major Hollywood directors like Spielberg.
It almost feels like they are preparing the public for something massive by mid-2026.
It definitely feels like a coordinated drip feed of information. You have these government disclosures and media pushes happening in rapid succession. But the Exorcist conclusion is incredibly blunt, and it just cuts through all the sci-fi speculation.
He states categorically that aliens simply do not exist.
Period. What people are seeing in the sky, or what is being intentionally presented to the public, are demons.
He argues that the entire extraterrestrial narrative is a highly sophisticated psychological operation.
A psyop.
Yes, and its specific design is to completely supplant Christianity, erase the Genesis creation story, and offer a secular, technological savior.
To really grasp why he draws such a hard line against biological extraterrestrials, we have to examine the philosophical bedrock of this worldview, right?
Right. It relies heavily on an ancient concept called a hierarchy of being.
Okay, break that down for us.
In this theological architecture, God created the universe in a perfect, seamless gradation of existence. At the very bottom, you have inanimate matter.
Like rocks and minerals.
Exactly. Move up a step, you have vegetative life plants. Above that, sentient life animals, which have physical bodies and senses. And at the absolute pinnacle of the created order are the angels, who are purely spiritual, immaterial intellects.
So it's a ladder, and humans are sitting right on the middle rungs.
We are the ultimate bridge. Humanity sits exactly in the gap between the animal kingdom and the angelic realm. We're philosophically defined as rational animals.
Meaning we possess physical bodies, instincts, and sensory experiences just like animals, but we are also endowed with rationality and an immaterial intellect, just like the angels.
Precisely. In this concept of a perfect divine hierarchy, every single level of existence is filled. There are no missing rungs on the ladder, and crucially, there are no duplicates of a specific transitional nature.
Ah, I'm seeing the structural issue here. If a fleet of intelligent, physical, biological aliens suddenly lands from another galaxy, it completely shatters this perfect architectural hierarchy.
It does. You would suddenly have another rational animal that isn't human. It violates the core philosophical blueprint of how they believe creation was ordered.
But the disruption to the philosophical order is massive enough, yet the theological implications regarding original sin are even more problematic for this framework, aren't they?
Oh, completely. In Christian theology, Adam wasn't just the first man. He was given dominion over the totality of the physical created order.
Right?
When the fall occurred, when Adam introduced original sin, it didn't merely taint human nature. It fundamentally broke the fabric of the entire physical universe. The source references St. Paul's writings about the whole of creation groaning under the weight of this fracture.
Wait, let me get this straight. So, if there were highly advanced, intelligent aliens living peacefully in the Andromeda Galaxy doing their own thing, they would suddenly find their universe broken and subjected to death and decay because of a choice made by one guy named Adam on a tiny blue planet billions of light years away.
That is the exact theological paradox the Exorcist is highlighting.
And they aren't even related to him.
Right. Christ's incarnation and redemption are explicitly biologically tied to redeeming the lineage of Adam. If these extraterrestrials exist, they would be suffering the catastrophic cosmic effects of a fallen universe. Yet they would be entirely ineligible for the specific redemption offered through human nature.
Wow.
Beyond that, the source draws on early church fathers who firmly positioned humanity as the absolute center of the moral universe. The very existence, the testing, and the subsequent rebellion of the angelic realm all revolved around God's plan for humanity.
So introducing aliens into the mix decenters this entire cosmic drama, reducing humanity to just one of many intelligent species on a crowded universal stage. But surely the counterargument is pretty obvious here. If you have a God of infinite love and a physical universe that is practically infinite in scale, billions of galaxies, trillions of stars, why in the world would he leave it all empty?
It's a very common question.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't a limitless creator paint on the entire canvas? It almost feels arrogant to assume this unimaginably vast expanse of space is just a dark, empty theater for one single species.
It is a completely natural, logical objection. However, the expert in the source material counters that assumption by invoking what he calls the principle of evidence.
Okay, what is that?
This is the standard of proof he uses when evaluating claims of demonic possession, and he applies the exact same rigor to the extraterrestrial question. The principle dictates that the certitude of our judgment must perfectly match the certitude of the evidence provided.
Right.
He argues that just because a pilot captures footage of an object in the sky defying known aerodynamics, leaping to the conclusion that it is a biological entity from a distant solar system is an astronomical leap of logic unsupported by the data.
And he actually pulls in physics to back this up, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that serious astrophysicists have calculated the sheer energy requirements for interstellar travel, even from the star systems closest to Earth.
The numbers are just wild.
They are. The mathematical and physical barriers are so extreme that it is highly unreasonable to presume biological creatures are making the trip regularly, if at all.
So, therefore, in the total absence of solid physical proof like no bodies, no crashed biological craft, and given the massive theological contradictions an alien species would cause in his worldview, he just concludes that these phenomena are immaterial.
Yes. They are spiritual, demonic entities masquerading as advanced aliens. Their goal is to offer humanity an alternative, highly technological salvation narrative that completely bypasses the need for a creator.
Wild. So if these entities aren't gray biological creatures from Alpha Centauri, but are actually ancient, highly intelligent spiritual beings, we have to ask how they're actually built.
The architecture of an angel.
Yes. Because the source dives into astonishing, almost mechanical detail about this, and it is a total paradigm shift.
To understand the architecture of an angel, we have to look at their creation, which this framework, drawing heavily on the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, describes as fundamentally alien to human creation.
Right, because humanity expands over time. We reproduce generation after generation, entirely bound by the physical constraints of time and space.
Angels, on the other hand, were created entirely at once. It was instantaneous, billions of them brought into existence in a single moment.
Just a sudden explosive realization of billions of minds. And they don't even exist in our concept of time, do they?
No, they exist in a state of being called the avum. To grasp this, we have to define time. Time in our physical universe is a measurement of matter moving through space. It has a definitive beginning, a chronological sequence of events, and an end.
Okay.
Eternity, which is the state where God exists, has no beginning, no end, and no sequence whatsoever. It is an infinite unchanging now.
hard for the human brain to process, but okay.
And the aven sits right in the middle. It has a definite beginning, the exact moment God created the angels, but it has no end, and it does not experience the passage of time the way physical matter does.
Okay, let's get into the weeds on how these beings are classified, because this is where the theology sounds like hard science fiction. The source makes the claim that every single angel is its own entirely distinct species.
This hinges on a profound philosophical understanding of how we define differences between things. Let's look at humanity. You and I belong to the exact same species because we share the same specific difference.
Which is human rationality.
Exactly. What actually makes us different from each other as individuals are called accidental qualities. These are traits entirely tied to our physical, material bodies. I might be taller, you might have different colored hair, our vocal cords have different shapes.
Our individuality is rooted in the fact that we occupy different matter.
Yes.
But angels are purely spiritual. They don't have bodies, they don't have matter.
Precisely the point. Because they entirely lack physical matter, they cannot possibly differ from one another by accidental physical qualities.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as a taller angel or a heavier angel.
Right.
Therefore, logically, the only possible way one angel can be distinct from another angel is if they differ by their very nature.
Yeah.
They must differ in their specific essence.
Wow.
The philosophical and functional gap between one angel and the next is as vast as the biological gap between a blade of grass and a great white shark.
Let me make sure I'm really visualizing this correctly. Humans are essentially different models of the exact same smartphone. I might have a red one with a ton of photo storage. You might have a black one with a cracked screen and a dying battery. But the underlying hardware blueprint and the operating system are completely identical.
We're the same thing.
But angels, one angel is a supercomputer, the next angel is a communications satellite, the next angel is a transatlantic fiber optic cable. They are entirely different forms of existence, entirely different functional species, and we just lazily group them all together under the generic umbrella term angel.
That analogy captures the essence perfectly. And because they are entirely different species with varying degrees of capacity, they are organized into a spectacularly strict hierarchy.
A chain of command.
Yes. This hierarchy consists of 9 distinct choirs, which are grouped into 3 main tiers. And the entire organizing principle of this hierarchy is raw intelligence.
And in this framework, intelligence is directly linked to willpower. The greater the intellect, the more incredibly powerful the will.
The correlation is absolute. The more clearly a being can perceive reality, the stronger its will operates. Let's break down the structure.
Please do.
At the absolute apex, you have the highest tier, which includes the seraphim, the cherubim, and the thrones.
Okay, top tier.
The seraphim are at the very top. Their specific nature and their assigned task is singular. They exist to contemplate and burn with love for God. That is their entire function, and fulfilling it brings them infinite perfection.
Amazing.
Right below them are the cherubim. Their perfection is centered around profound, unfathomable knowledge and the contemplation of ultimate beauty.
Okay, knowledge and beauty.
Below them are the thrones, whose task is to take the immense knowledge of God's will and begin propagating it downward through the hierarchy.
So that top tier is basically the ultimate cosmic think tank. They're just immersed in pure knowledge, beauty, and love.
Moving down, you reach the middle tier, the dominations, the virtues, and the powers. You can think of them as the executive administrators of the cosmos.
Middle management, basically.
Sort of, yes. Their role is to take the directives from the thrones and govern the physical and spiritual laws of the universe, ensuring that the grand design is organized and maintained.
Got it.
Finally, you reach the lowest tier, which consists of the principalities, the archangels, and the angels. These are the beings who operate closest to our reality. They are the foot soldiers, the messengers, the ones who execute physical commands, manage human affairs on a national scale, and serve as individual guardian angels.
It sounds like a flawless, infinitely complex chain of command, which really makes the next part of the source material so incredibly difficult to swallow. You have these beings with unimaginable, terrifying intelligence. They are organized perfectly. They exist in a state of grace.
Right.
How could a massive portion of these superintelligent entities make a choice that damned them to hell forever?
To comprehend the fall of the angels, we have to completely discard our understanding of how learning works.
Okay.
The way an angel acquires knowledge is the complete inverse of human learning. Human knowledge is empirical. It is messy and time-consuming. We rely on our physical senses.
Like trial and error?
Yes.
Yeah.
We see a dog, we pet it, maybe we get bitten by one, and over years of observation, our brain slowly abstracts the concept of dog. We acquire knowledge sequentially, step by step.
I mean, it takes a human baby a year just to figure out how to walk, let alone understand abstract concepts.
Exactly. But angels, having no physical senses and no bodies, do not learn over time. According to this theological framework, at the exact split-second moment of their creation, God instantaneously infused them with the knowledge of all created things.
Infused knowledge, it's quite literally like plugging a hard drive into a mainframe and downloading the entire database in 1 second.
It is absolute immediate comprehension. They instantaneously understood everything there was to know about the essence of all things, every law of physics, the nature of plants, animals, humanity, and the universe, up to the exact limit of their specific angelic intelligence.
Wow.
They didn't have to ponder, debate, or experiment. The knowledge was simply perfectly present within their intellect from the first moment of existence.
So if they knew everything so perfectly, how did this lead to a rebellion? The source breaks this event down into 3 incredibly rapid, split-second instances that occurred within that timeless Avum state.
Let's walk through those 3 instances. In the first instance of their creation, their immense intellect was activated. They instantly perceived their own magnificent nature.
Okay.
They understood their specific difference, their assigned task within the hierarchy, and they saw the nature of every other angel. Crucially, they were also given a supernatural faith. They knew God existed, they understood his triune nature, and they were given the revelation that God would eventually lower himself to become incarnate as a physical human being.
So they saw the entire cosmic blueprint right out of the gate.
They saw it all, and in seeing the infinite beauty and goodness of God, their natural, unforced response in that very first instance was profound delight. It wasn't a moral choice yet, it was simply the massive gravity of their will naturally pulling them toward the ultimate good.
Makes sense.
But they also saw, with absolute terrifying clarity, the consequences of the choice they were about to make. Eternal, unimaginable happiness in the beatific vision if they remained faithful, or eternal, agonizing ruin in hell if they rebelled.
There is zero ambiguity, no gray area. Which brings us to the second instance, the test.
In the theology of this framework, every intelligent creature, no matter how perfect, must be tested to actively prove their love. In the second instance, the angels were presented with a profound choice. They possessed incredible natural perfections, power, and beauty. But they could clearly see that God possessed an even higher infinite perfection. To achieve the ultimate good, the beatific vision, which means seeing God face to face and participating in his divine life, they had to willingly sacrifice their desire to grasp at perfections that did not belong to their specific, assigned nature.
Basically, they had to accept their place in the hierarchy. They had to stay in their lane.
Exactly that. They had to choose to remain faithful to the specific task God assigned them. They had to sacrifice the temptation of an autonomous, lesser good being the masters of their own destiny in order to receive the ultimate greater good as a pure gift from God. In this second instance, the entire angelic host made their choice.
And this is where the absolute tragedy of perfect clarity comes into play. The source makes this point that is darkly humorous on the surface, but profoundly deep when you think about it. The Exorcist bluntly states that God has mercy on humanity because we're stupid.
It's a theological truth delivered with a sledgehammer. Humans are inherently bound by time, physical limitations, and sensory learning. We make massive life decisions based on highly limited, flawed information.
Oh, absolutely. Our minds are constantly clouded by biological emotions, physical fatigue, hormonal imbalances, and irrational impulses.
Right. We make a terrible choice.
Oh, yeah.
We physically experience the negative fallout. We feel regret, and our will changes. Because our wills are malleable over time, and because of this inherent biological weakness, our stupidity God extends mercy.
He gives us an entire lifetime to course correct, to learn from the burn.
But the angels are not stupid. They had zero physical impulses, zero fatigue, zero emotional clouding, and absolute perfect knowledge of the exact consequences of their actions.
So when they made their choice in that second instance, their wills didn't just lean one way, they became permanently, eternally fixed in that decision.
Which triggers the third instance. Having made their permanent, irrevocable choice in the second instance, the third instance was instantaneous judgment. The faithful angels were immediately brought into the beatific vision of heaven, and the rebellious angels were instantly cast out into hell.
Wait, I have to stop you there. This is the part that sounds completely counterintuitive to the human brain.
Yeah.
If they possessed supercomputer intelligence and they knew with absolute 100% certainty that choosing rebellion meant they would be suffering in hell for all eternity, why on earth would they choose it?
It is hard to grasp.
It's like a gambler betting his life savings on a hand of poker when he can clearly see the dealer has a royal flush. It just defies all logic.
To understand it, we have to completely reframe how we view their choice. It was not a gamble. It wasn't a miscalculation. It was an act of perfect, terrifying, unadulterated pride.
Pride.
The choice fundamentally came down to a refusal of their assigned task and an obsession with their own excellence. Let's look at Lucifer as the prime example. As a high-ranking cherubim, his very nature was driven by the contemplation of knowledge and ultimate beauty. He saw the infinite perfection of God, and he saw his own staggering beauty. But instead of accepting that he could only participate in that ultimate perfection as a humble gift by submitting his will to God's order, he wanted to grasp it on his own terms.
He didn't want to be a reflection of the light. He wanted to be the source of his own light.
It was a perfect, crystal-clear act of self-love over the love of God. He chose autonomy in ruin over submission in paradise.
Wild.
And because angelic wills are permanently fixed upon making a choice, the source notes a chilling reality observed during exorcisms. The demons will openly express profound hatred for their punishment. They are in constant, unimaginable misery.
But they wouldn't change it.
Yet, when the exorcist compels them to answer, they admit that if given the chance, they would make the exact same choice again. Their pride is absolute. The lock on their will can never be picked.
That is genuinely chilling. The idea of an intelligence so vast being locked in a cage of its own permanent pride. But what is really fascinating about the source material is how it suddenly pivots from this massive, ancient cosmic event directly into the mundane reality of our everyday lives.
Because it applies to us.
Yes,
Okay.
because this angelic test, the requirement to sacrifice a lesser good in order to achieve a greater good, was not just a one-time event that happened in the Avum. It is the exact fundamental template for human existence.
This brings us to the core thesis of the Exorcist's entire theological framework, which relies on the writings of Thomas Aquinas. According to this source, there is a single ultimate goal for humanity.
What is?
The ultimate thing God desires from any intelligent creature is the total sacrifice of their free will to his will.
So we need to define what a true sacrifice actually looks like in this framework, because in modern language, we use that word incredibly casually.
We do.
We say, I sacrificed my Saturday to help my friend move a couch, or I sacrificed a piece of cake from my diet. But the source breaks down a true theological sacrifice into a very strict, unforgiving three-part structure.
And it's important to note that if any one of these three components is missing or incomplete, it fails to be a true theological sacrifice.
Okay, what's the part one?
The first component is the offertory. This is the initial setting apart of a good thing. It requires a genuine internal willingness to completely detach yourself from a lesser good in order to offer it up for a greater good.
The willingness.
Yes. The crucial psychological element here is the willingness to be separated from the object of your attachment.
The interviewer in the original recording brings up the biblical story of Cain and Abel to illustrate this, which clarifies it perfectly.
Oh, yes.
Abel offered the absolute best of his flock. He detached himself from his most prized possession completely. Cain, on the other hand, offered something objectively good crops, but he held the absolute best back for himself. He wasn't fully detached, so the offertory was corrupted.
The second component is the slaying of the victim. Now, in modern terms, this rarely means blood or physical death. It signifies the actual loss, the suffering, or the psychological friction experienced in the process of giving up that lesser good.
It's the actual physical friction of your stomach growling when you are fasting, or the sharp emotional pain of forcing yourself to bite your tongue and stay silent when you desperately want to snap back and win an argument.
Right.
The slaying is the pain of the detachment.
Well said. Finally, the third component is the consummation. This is the apex of the sacrifice. It means completely dying to oneself, leaving absolutely nothing on the table, retaining no shred of pride or ego.
Just total surrender.
It is the perfect, seamless alignment of your will with the greater good, where your desire is fully consumed in the offering.
Okay, here is where this deep dive gets incredibly practical and frankly a little unnerving to think about. The source material highlights a highly specific, intense anecdote from the Exorcist's experience.
The Beelzebub story.
Yeah. He is in the middle of a session, and he commands a demon specifically Beelzebub, who is a very high-ranking entity. The Exorcist notes that Beelzebub's original angelic task before the fall was to enlighten minds to the profound beauty of sacrifice.
Right.
So the Exorcist commands Beelzebub to reveal exactly how he attacks humanity today.
Because Beelzebub fell, his entire nature is inverted. Instead of enlightening human minds to the beauty of sacrifice, his singular obsessive goal is to thwart human sacrifice at its very root.
Right, and Beelzebub confesses, supposedly compelled by the authority of the ritual to tell the truth, that his primary tactic against humans is incredibly, almost disappointingly subtle.
It's not what you expect.
He doesn't spend his time trying to convince average people to commit massive, cinematic, horrific crimes. He says, I simply convince people that they cannot be separated from a particular good.
When you analyze that psychologically, it's a devastatingly effective subversion. Think back to the very first step of sacrifice we just discussed, the offertory.
The willing.
The absolute requirement for the offertory is the willingness to be separated from a lesser good. If a demonic influence, or even just your own corrupted psychology, can convince your intellect that you literally cannot survive without that comfort, that pleasure, or that specific habit, the sacrifice is assassinated before it even begins.
I really want you, listening in right now, to relate this directly to your own daily life. Think about how profound this is. This is the absolute root cause of mediocrity, of creative stagnation, of addiction.
It really is.
It's that quiet, persistent internal voice whispering that you literally can't get through a stressful workday without that drink in the evening. It's the voice saying you can't function without checking your phone for a dopamine hit every 5 minutes.
The rationalization.
Exactly. It's the belief that you can't endure the intense discomfort of initiating a difficult but necessary conversation. By convincing your intellect that you cannot detach from a lesser good, the spiritual adversary completely sabotages the offertory stage of your daily life.
Because the greater good, the healthy relationship, the clear mind, the disciplined life, is abandoned entirely because we deeply believe you're hopelessly tethered to the lesser good.
The Exorcist points out that this single, subtle subversion of the will is exactly how humanity was taken down in the Genesis narrative with the apple, and it remains the root cause of nearly every moral and psychological defect in the modern world. We fundamentally refuse to let go of the lesser good because we've been convinced it's essential for our survival.
So if this is the grand strategy, we have to look at the mechanics of it. We've established that these spiritual beings do not have physical bodies. What is the actual mechanical method they use to hack a biological human mind and insert these thoughts?
To understand the mechanics of this influence, we have to look at the exact intersection where the material world meets the immaterial world. Angels and demons do not possess physical matter, but their immense spiritual wills possess a natural, inherent ability to move physical matter.
To put it in sci-fi terms, it's essentially a highly advanced form of telekinesis.
Mind over matter, literally. They can move atoms with their will.
Precisely. Now consider the human brain. A significant portion of our intellect, specifically the physical brain tissue, the chemical synapses, and the neurological pathways that govern our imagination, our memory, and our sensory processing, is entirely material.
Right.
Because it is matter, these spiritual entities can directly interact with it.
Right.
They can apply their will to subtly move the matter, the electrons and chemicals, within our physical brains.
The source explains that demons primarily target a very specific faculty, the human imagination. But it's important to clarify they don't necessarily just drop horrific, nightmarish images into your head like a horror movie jump scare.
No, that would be too obvious.
Their most effective insidious tactic is skewing our perspective of reality. They alter the way we perceive an image or an idea, making something that is objectively evil, destructive, or toxic look incredibly appealing, comforting, and logical.
And vice versa.
Conversely, they can make something objectively good like discipline, prayer, or fidelity seem repulsive, boring, or restrictive.
The source material provides a striking, real-world anecdote from another exorcist to illustrate exactly how this perception hacking works in real time.
Oh, this story is wild.
This exorcist was working with a possessed woman. Objectively speaking, outside the context of the possession, this woman was not conventionally attractive. However, during an intense session, the demons actively targeted and skewed the exorcist's own physical perception.
Okay.
He suddenly found himself looking at her and feeling an intense, overwhelming inclination that she was remarkably, seductively beautiful.
His actual visual and psychological reality was being actively distorted by an outside intelligence.
But here is where the human intellect fights back. Because he had a trained mind, He immediately recognized the intellectual incongruity. He knew, rationally and objectively, that this sudden perception was false and intrusive.
So what did he do?
He stopped what he was doing, he prayed internally to break the influence, and instantly his perception snapped back to reality. Demons operate entirely in the realm of deception, trying to pull our sensory perceptions out of alignment with objective truth.
But this isn't just a one-sided defensive battle where we are constantly being bombarded, right?
Yeah.
Good angels have their own specific countermeasures.
They do, and they operate in a fundamentally different way. While demons skew the material, physical imagination to cause confusion and obscure the truth, good angels operate through a process called illumination.
Illumination.
As we discussed earlier, while part of our brain is physical, there is a higher part of the human intellect that is entirely immaterial. The part that is capable of abstract judgment, self-reflection, grasping universal truths, and ultimately the part that survives physical death.
Right, the soul's intellect.
Angels, being purely immaterial themselves, can interact directly with this immaterial aspect of our intellect. They don't just hand you a picture or a skewed feeling.
So what do they do?
Through illumination, they strengthen your mind's inherent capacity to judge reality accurately. They provide sudden, piercing clarity, helping you strip away emotional bias and see a complex situation exactly as it is, with profound depth and objective truth.
Wait, I have to pause here because this concept raises a massive red flag regarding human autonomy.
How so?
If invisible entities with supercomputer intelligence have telekinetic access to alter our brain chemistry, and other angels can directly interact with our immaterial intellect, well, how much free will do we actually possess? Are we just fleshy puppets on spiritual strings, constantly being yanked back and forth between demonic deception and angelic illumination?
That is the ultimate existential fear this framework naturally provokes. But the expert in the source material clarifies a crucial foundational boundary. Christ, or God, maintains absolute sovereign control over the entire battlefield.
Okay, so there are rules.
Demons do not have a free pass to simply maraud through human minds at will, turning dials and flipping switches whenever they please.
It brings to mind that old scripture quote, the devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, but the caveat is the lion is on a very sturdy leash.
The leash is God's permissive will. The demons constantly probe, they watch our behavior, they look for psychological weaknesses, but they can only enter our imagination or actively influence our minds when God specifically, intentionally permits it.
And why would he permit it?
According to the source, God allows this access for one primary, overarching reason: to test and temper human free will. It all circles back to the concept of sacrifice. God allows the temptation, the friction, and the skewed perception so that the human soul has the active opportunity to choose the greater good over the lesser deceptive good.
So the friction is the point.
Yes, the intense friction of that internal battle is the only forge where true spiritual virtue is built.
So the human mind is essentially a crucible. But what happens when these skewed perspectives, these subtle deceptions, take root not just in one isolated struggling mind, but in millions of minds simultaneously?
That's when things scale up.
Right. What happens when an entire culture loses its grip on reality? That leads us directly into how this worldview interprets massive, sweeping societal shifts.
The source material notes a very specific, undeniable societal progression. It observes that in the modern world, Christianity seems uniquely acceptable to publicly disparage and mock, far more so than other belief systems.
Interesting observation.
The Exorcist doesn't view this as a natural cultural evolution. He attributes it explicitly to demonic influence, gaining a systemic ascendancy over global culture, actively organizing society against the one framework he believes represents objective truth.
And to explain the mechanics of how a whole society gets flipped upside down, how it loses its mind collectively, the expert brings in St. Thomas Aquinas again.
Yes, the four-step progression.
Right. Aquinas outlined a brilliant, chillingly accurate four-step progression of societal sin, mapping exactly how a culture moves from universally recognizing a vice to eventually declaring that same vice a mandatory virtue.
The progression is highly logical and observable in history. Step one is the baseline. A society universally recognizes that a specific vice or behavior is immoral and destructive. However, human beings are inherently weak and prone to failure, so people still engage in the vice. But crucially, they do it secretly, out of a healthy sense of shame and respect for the societal standard.
That makes sense. Step one.
Step two begins the erosion. The vice gradually becomes more common, people get tired of hiding, and they begin engaging in the behavior openly. The society, because so many of members have secretly compromised themselves, suddenly realizes it lacks the moral authority, the willpower, or the courage to stop it.
It's the classic dynamic of, well, we can't really punish them or speak out against them because honestly, we've been doing it too. The shame just disappears.
Exactly. Which leads directly to step 3, which is the critical psychological inversion. The society is now openly living in vice, but human beings cannot tolerate long-term cognitive dissonance.
Right, it drives you crazy.
They can't bear the guilt of knowing they're doing wrong while doing it openly. So collectively, the society rationalizes the behavior. They change the definitions. They declare that the vice is no longer a sin, no longer destructive, but is actually a positive virtue. It becomes a celebrated good.
And that brings us to step 4, which is the authoritarian lock-in.
The worst stage.
The society, now fully committed to its new inverted reality, actively attacks, marginalizes, and seeks to utterly destroy anyone who still dares to call the vice a vice. The people, simply speaking the old objective truth, become the enemies of the state.
This 4-step progression is exactly how the source material interprets our current cultural moment. To maintain our impartiality, we're simply presenting the source's viewpoint here. The speaker firmly believes that modern believers are currently being culturally, corporately, and legally forced to accept ideologies that are directly contrary to objective reality and their faith.
Right, we're just outlining his view.
The source specifically points to the rapid normalization of LGBTQ issues and the celebration of gender transitions as textbook examples of Step 3 and Step 4 playing out in real time across society.
So, if you are a believer operating within this framework, what on earth is the solution? If society is under a massive, coordinated spiritual deception that has firmly reached authoritarian Step 4, how do you respond?
The Exorcist advice is shockingly uncompromising.
Yeah, he states that believers must step up and wield the axe.
It's a profound call for radical, vocal truth-telling, entirely regardless of the social, financial, or personal consequences. He strongly warns against a passive, weakened, effeminate interpretation of Christianity.
He argues that the concept of turning the other cheek was never meant to be a license to allow falsehoods and deceptions to dictate reality and destroy a culture.
The interviewer in the original recording uses a brilliant philosophical comparison here to illustrate this, Plato's allegory of the cave.
Oh, that's a classic.
Imagine a group of people who have been chained in a dark cave their entire lives, facing a blank wall. All they see are shadow puppets projected on the wall by a fire behind them. To them, those shadows are absolute reality.
Because it's all they know.
Then, one guy manages to break his chains. He crawls up, goes outside, and is blinded by the actual sun. He sees real trees, real animals, true reality. And out of love for his fellow prisoners, he goes back down into the dark to tell everyone the truth.
And how do the people chained in the cave react to this truth teller? They don't thank him. They don't celebrate him.
Not at all.
They violently chafe against him. They fight him. They are terrified. And they want to stay comfortably in the dark with the familiar shadows they understand. The Exorcist applies this perfectly to modern culture, arguing that speaking objective truth in a fully deceived society guarantees that you will take a severe social beating.
But he also stresses that this willingness to take the beating is the only way to break the ice. It's an incredible psychological observation. It only takes one person in a crowded room, one person on a corporate board, or one parent at a school meeting willing to stand up, absorb the hits, and say, "This is absurd, this is false, and here's why," to break the spell.
Just one person.
Once that one brave person wields the axe, it shatters the illusion of consensus. It suddenly makes it safe for all the other silent, terrified people of goodwill to look around and say, "Yeah, I actually completely agree with them."
That act of wielding the axe is the ultimate social manifestation of the sacrifice we discussed earlier. The individual must be willing to sacrifice the lesser good, their social comfort, their popularity, their reputation, perhaps even their career advancement or livelihood, in order to achieve the much greater good of injecting truth into a deeply deceived environment.
But breaking that ice, stepping out of the comfortable cave, requires immense, almost supernatural strength. It feels like you're fighting an invisible tide that wants to drown you.
Which begs the practical question. What weapons does the source say are actually available for this kind of intense spiritual combat?
This brings us to the spiritual arsenal provided in this framework. If the actual battle is taking place in the immaterial mind, then the weapons must also be immaterial. The primary mechanism for engaging this unseen reality is prayer. But the source defines prayer in a highly specific mechanical way that most people aren't familiar with.
Right.
Because angels do not have physical ears or bodies, communication with them cannot be verbal in the physical sense. It is entirely mental or telepathic.
So how exactly does a fleeting thought in my physical biological brain reach an angelic intellect operating outside of time in the evum?
It operates through a divine routing system. It routes through God. The Exorcist explains the mechanics. If you direct your conscious thought and intention toward your specific guardian angel, God instantly infuses that specific intention directly into the angel's mind.
Oh, wow.
Upon receiving it, the angel then directs its will toward you, and a telepathic connection is securely established.
The source material is full of these incredible, almost cinematic, real-world examples of this telepathic mechanism in action. There's a story told by the Exorcist himself.
In the airport, right.
Yeah. He is standing in a crowded airport security line, holding his boarding pass, surrounded by people. He gets a desperate phone call from an assistant telling him that a possessed woman miles away is currently being physically pinned to the ground by a demonic force, and multiple people cannot move her.
Because he is in an airport about to board a commercial flight, he obviously cannot perform a full, formal exorcism ritual. So relying on this exact mechanism, he mentally directs his thought.
Right.
He asks the specific, high-ranking guardian angel assigned to his priesthood to go to the woman's location and physically intervene.
Ship.
He gets on his plane, lands an hour later, and calls his assistant back. The assistant tells him that eventually the woman was freed. And the possessed woman later asks the assistant, "Did Father send the angel of his priesthood to me? Because a massive angel appeared and physically held my hand the entire time." The telepathic routing worked instantaneously across miles of physical space.
And the host of the original interview also shared deeply personal, intense experiences of what he believed were angelic interventions.
Yes, his military deployment.
He recounted a time during his deployment in Afghanistan where he stepped directly on an unexploded ordnance, an artillery shell, that simply, inexplicably failed to detonate under his weight.
Terrifying.
Even more profoundly, he described a moment of total psychological despair in his garage after returning home, where he attempted suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. He was only stopped because the intense heat of the exhaust mysteriously melted his car's gas tank, causing a massive fuel leak that forced him to shut the car off and survive.
He firmly attributes his survival in both of these extreme moments to direct, physical, angelic intervention.
There was also a slightly lighter but equally baffling story about an 80-year-old woman. Her 17-year-old companion didn't know how to drive. The elderly woman, unable to safely navigate, prayed specifically to Saint Raphael, the archangel associated with safe travel, put her hands on the steering wheel, and claims the car seemingly navigated and drove itself safely all the way home.
While these stories vary in intensity, they all illustrate a core, non-negotiable theological principle. The expert outlines, prayer begets what it signifies.
Meaning you literally get exactly what you ask for.
Yes. The mechanics of prayer in this framework are incredibly precise. God and the entire spiritual hierarchy are constantly listening, but they absolutely respect the boundaries of human free will. They require us to actively invite them in.
The biblical phrase is, knock and the door will be opened.
Therefore, the Exorcist advises that believers must ask for highly specific, targeted interventions. You shouldn't just pray a vague, "God, please help my child." You must pray, "God, grant my child the specific grace to see reality clearly today," and bind any demonic influences that are actively skewing their imagination. The precision of the request dictates the precision of the grace given.
The source also highlights highly specific physical tools used in this combat, most notably the rosary, which Padre Pio famously referred to simply as the weapon.
Yes.
It's described not just as a repetitive meditation, but almost like a spiritual drumbeat that generates a compounding, devastating effect on demonic forces. The Exorcist cites the historical Battle of Lepanto, where heavily outnumbered, outgunned Christian naval forces somehow defeated the massive Ottoman fleet.
Attributing the miraculous victory to the Pope, asking all of Europe to pray the rosary specifically for that outcome.
But this incredibly complex system of intercession praying to Mary or to specific saints or to guardian angels often causes a massive amount of confusion and pushback from people outside this specific tradition.
It does. It's a stumbling block for many.
Exactly, and this is where I would naturally get stuck if I were trying to apply this. If God is the infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing creator of the universe, and he is intimately listening to every single thought in my head, Why on earth do we need to go through the middle management of angels and saints? Why not just bypass the hierarchy and ask the CEO directly every single time?
The source addresses this highly common objection directly.
Yeah.
You absolutely can go direct to God, and he always listens.
Yeah.
But God deliberately, intentionally established this massive, interconnected hierarchy of angels and saints because he deeply desires his creations to actively participate in the distribution of his grace.
He wants a family, not just a list of direct reports.
Exactly. The Exorcist uses a highly relatable corporate analogy to explain the mechanics of intercession.
The favorite employee analogy.
Yes. Imagine a massive corporation. If a random stranger off the street somehow gets into the CEO's office and asks for a massive favor or a donation, the CEO might listen out of kindness and might even grant it. But that same CEO is far more likely and far more pleased to grant that exact same favor if the CEO's most trusted, deeply loyal, favorite employee or their own spouse comes into the office and says, "Hey, I've vetted this person. I care deeply about this outcome. Would you please do this for them on my behalf?"
It's relational.
Yes. God delights in answering the requests of those who have proven themselves closest to him in holiness. That is the fundamental relational function of intercessory prayer.
Okay, so we have mapped out this massive, terrifyingly complex framework. We are all wayfarers, moving through a heavily contested physical world, constantly targeted by superintelligent fallen species, actively trying to subvert our will through our imagination, while simultaneously being aided by an unseen hierarchy of angels trying to illuminate our intellect.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So where does this lifelong, exhausting battle of the mind ultimately end? What is the actual finish line?
The deep dive concludes by looking at the end times and the highly precise mechanics of eternity. The source briefly outlines a prophetic timeline where humanity's morals will eventually implode completely, setting the global stage for the Antichrist.
Yeah.
In this framework, the Antichrist will not initially appear as a monster, but will present himself as the ultimate, secular, highly efficient savior to all of human problems. This deception eventually leads to a final cosmic sequence involving historical biblical figures like Enoch and Elijah returning to preach, a massive battle led by the archangel Michael, and finally Christ's physical return to permanently end the conflict.
But zooming in past the global apocalypse, what actually happens to the individual human soul? The source explains the actual structural nature of the afterlife, and it completely shatters the generic pop culture idea of clouds and harps versus fire and pitchforks. There are distinct, rigid levels.
Yes, both heaven and hell operate on incredibly strict, unbreakable hierarchies. In hell, the hierarchy is completely inverted. The lower you go, the more profoundly depraved and evil the soul is. However, the terrifying twist is that this intense evil also grants those lower entities more dominance and power to actively torment the souls and demons above them in the hierarchy. It is an eternal structure built entirely on raw power, abuse, and unyielding suffering.
And heaven, how is the hierarchy structured there?
Heaven's levels are determined entirely by how much sanctifying grace a soul willingly acquired during their physical life on earth. Sanctifying grace, in this theology, is essentially the quantitative measure of how much of God's own divine nature is indwelling within your soul.
So the holier the life you lived, the more frequently and deeply you sacrificed your own will to the greater good, the higher your ultimate capacity to experience God in eternity.
The source used a very specific, beautiful term for this experience, the light of glory.
Lumen Gloria.
Yes, it addresses a fundamental philosophical problem. God is infinite, and the human soul, even in heaven, remains finite. A finite vessel cannot naturally comprehend an infinite being.
It would overload.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in heaven, God actively infuses the soul with this light of glory. It essentially upgrades the mind's capacity, peeling back the veil so the finite soul can clearly see God face to face, experiencing his infinite nature directly inside their own mind without being destroyed by it.
But here is the beautiful, redeeming catch about these levels of heaven. You might end up at a much lower level than someone who lived a life of intense, famous, heroic virtue. You might have a smaller capacity. But in heaven, the source notes there is absolutely zero envy.
None whatsoever. Because whatever your specific capacity is, whether it's a small cup or a massive barrel, it is filled to its absolute brim with perfect happiness.
Right.
You see God perfectly according to your specific capacity. When you look at a saint in a much higher level who has a vastly greater capacity, you don't feel a shred of jealousy. Instead, you feel immense, overwhelming joy and delight that God's infinite glory is being manifested so beautifully and powerfully in them.
It's a perfect, flawless economy of joy. Which brings us to perhaps the most profound, emotionally resonant concept in the entire source material, the mechanics of divine mercy.
To understand mercy, we must first understand justice. Justice dictates that every action has a proportionate, necessary reaction. A crime requires a proportionate punishment to balance the scales.
The ancient concept of lex talionis, an eye for an eye.
The Exorcist notes that if humanity were judged purely on strict justice, we would be utterly brutalized and destroyed by the compounding consequences of our own repeated failures.
But God introduces mercy, and the source defines mercy very specifically, not as a blind pardon, but as loosening the bonds of justice.
God willingly chooses not to apply the full crushing weight of the law, because loosening those bonds is better for our ultimate eternal spiritual well-being. But this mercy is not a blanket, unconditional amnesty.
Right, there are conditions.
It has two strict prerequisites. As we mentioned earlier, it is reserved for the stupid, those blinded by the inherent limits and weaknesses of human nature. But far more importantly, it is strictly reserved for the contrite.
You have to actually genuinely be sorry. You can't fake it.
Yes. When a human commits a sin, their will becomes disordered. They're actively valuing a lesser good pleasure, pride, comfort over God.
Okay.
But when that human experiences true contrition, when they honestly look at their destructive action and feel profound sorrow, specifically because it offended the ultimate good, that genuine sorrow proves that the internal order of the soul has been restored.
And then?
God sees that the restored order is present, and in direct response to that humility, he loosens the bonds of justice.
But here is the mind-bending part about God existing entirely outside of time, in the eternal now. Because God sees all of time simultaneously, he doesn't just forget your sin in the human sense. He sees the offense you committed right now for all of eternity.
But in that exact same infinite eternal gaze, he simultaneously sees Christ's infinite sacrifice on the cross paying the debt for it. And he simultaneously sees your genuine moment of contrition. He holds the offense, the payment, and the apology in one single eternal glance and continuously chooses to let you live under his mercy forever.
It is so heavy. It is an incredibly intricate, beautiful, and terrifying system. I want to throw in one final fascinating theological nugget the source revealed before we wrap up. We spent a lot of time talking about guardian angels, how they help wayfarers navigate this physical world. Did Jesus Christ have a guardian angel?
According to Thomas Aquinas and the expert in the source material, the answer is definitively no. A guardian angel is specifically assigned to a wayfarer, a soul that is on the journey, navigating the physical and spiritual dangers of the world, actively trying to find its way to the final destination of heaven.
But Christ was never a wayfarer. Even while walking the earth, enduring the physical limitations of humanity, his human nature already fully possessed the beatific vision from the very moment of conception. He wasn't trying to find his way to the destination. He had already arrived. The angels didn't need to guard him. They merely served him as their creator.
It perfectly caps off the architectural logic of this entire worldview. Every single piece, from the highest burning seraphim down to the microscopic daily exercise of human free will, fits into a precise, perfectly interlocking system of justice, intellect, and love.
So what are we ultimately walking away with here? We have traversed an incredibly detailed, exhaustive roadmap of an unseen reality. We started with the jarring idea that our modern anxieties, our bitter political battles, our obsession with digital privacy apps, our desperate attempts to stave off physical aging might just be elaborate smoking mirrors distracting us from the real war.
We explore the terrifying, instantaneous intelligence of angelic species, entities existing in the Avum, whose powerful wills are fixed forever in either perfect, submissive love or absolute, ruinous pride. We examine the daily, grinding mechanics of sacrifice, recognizing that the true battleground of life is simply the willingness to detach from a lesser comfort for a greater good.
And we looked at the invisible war taking place right now in our very imaginations, where our perceptions of reality are constantly being skewed by deception, and clarity must be fought for, thought by thought, through illumination and prayer. It is an immense amount of material to process.
Ultimately, it demands that you view every mundane choice you make, every moment of friction, every decision to indulge or to sacrifice, not as an isolated, meaningless event, but as a highly significant move on a cosmic chessboard with eternal stakes.
Which brings me right back to where we started today. We love the X-ray. We deeply love the clean, binary, undeniable diagnosis of the physical world. We want to see the jagged white line. But this deep dive asks us to seriously consider that the truest reality might just be the murky, invisible one we can't measure with a machine.
It asks us to look beyond the visible.
Exactly. So I want to leave you, the listener, with this one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, driving in your car or sitting at your desk. If this highly structured framework is even partially true, if the architecture of this worldview is accurate, and our immaterial minds are constantly accessible to external, highly intelligent spiritual influences, how much of your daily inner monologue is actually yours?
That is the question.
The next time you are sitting on the couch and you feel a sudden, entirely unprompted urge to abandon a good habit, to snap cruelly at someone you love, or to give into a lesser comfort that you know drags you down, or conversely, the next time you experience a sudden flash of profound, undeniable clarity that points you toward the truth when you were confused, pause for just a second. Look closely at that thought and ask yourself, who is really doing the talking?